Hello, good afternoon. Oi. Hopefully you all...
Throwing things
already. So nice to see you all. I am Lindsay-Rae McIntyre, the Chief Diversity Officer and the CVP of Talent and Learning. And I am joined today by the one and only Lay-Flurrie, Chief Accessibility Officer for Microsoft.
Hello. Hi there. Thank you for joining and thank you for having me.
We are really looking forward to having this conversation with you all today, and we're going to leave plenty of time for questions. If you have questions online, for those of you who are joining us online, and of course for those of you in the room, there's a mic in the middle of the room. So Jenny, as we get this conversation going, we're going to explore co-creation of products and experiences and how we can ensure in this epic era of AI that we are being inclusive of everyone. But let's start with a warm-up. How is it that you have maybe discovered a new way to use Copilot or an unexpected way to use Copilot in your work or in your life?
So I'll start with work. So I use Teams a lot. Anyone use Teams? Who loves Teams?
We love Teams.
Wow,
right?
That's a lot of enthusiasm. I wasn't expecting that, folks. I live on Teams. I mean, it's my everyday, and I'm deaf. And so what I found is Copilot has really changed my world because I use captioning, I use the transcript, I have my sign language interpreter pinned so I can see her at all times, but really the new biggest thing are meeting notes. So I'm finding that the meeting notes means that I'm just, it's just meant I still have a pen in my hand, ironically. I'm still always holding a pen. I haven't quite got out of the habit. But yes, I love meeting notes. How about you?
Well, in my life, I use Copilot to build meal plans and grocery lists. And at work, my current favorite use is to build an FAQ out of a document. It helps me pick out the themes really quickly and figure out how to spark a conversation. So we also would love to know how you all are using Copilot if you're in the chat. So this year in Microsoft's Diversity and Inclusion Report that we released in October, we organized that conversation to illuminate the ways in which we are threading and embedding diversity and inclusion through 4 primary lenses. We like alliteration, and so we used products, people, partnerships, and perspectives to frame that report. And Jenny and I thought that we would use that same frame for this conversation because we're expecting to cover a fair bit of ground. So Jenny, you've talked about the vast potential of AI to create a more accessible world and the importance of ensuring that the data that is used is representative of disability. You've also talked about the ROI trap. Can you share more about sort of how we're thinking about moving forward collectively on these topics?
Absolutely. So how many of you know about accessibility? How many feel like really good on what accessibility? That's actually about 80% of the room. So accessibility is making really the core of our digital physical environment accessible. The world is not built accessibly. If you want an evidence statement of that, we have stairs. Stairs are absolutely core to our world, but not accessible. So we have to render the world to be more accessible by remediating that. And I do think that it's incredibly important for us to think about that in anything and everything that we do, whether it's a meeting or an event like this one, or a product. Microsoft, we have 5,800 products, websites, and tools. That's how many are in what we call our inventory. And now we've got this influx of new tools coming through. Features and agents, Copilot agents coming through. So we have to be really, really principled in what we do. I think the first thing to remember in all of this, whether it's AI or not AI, is that if you don't know if it's accessible, it is not. I'm not trying to be cheeky, it's just real. If you haven't hit check accessibility on your document or your email before you send it, it is likely not accessible. And so the same goes with AI. In fact, the first principle of 3 is to make sure that whatever we do is accessible by all of the standards that exist and have existed for many, many years. Compliance being the floor, not the ceiling, right? Do not make your goal to be compliant. That's always going to leave you behind. But make your stuff accessible, be responsible, be fair in what you do. The second is to really make sure, and I think this transcends disability and accessibility, but make sure that the data that you have in your AI models is inclusive. Sadly, one of the facts that we found is that a lot of the data in AI models, regardless of where they come from, is not that inclusive. And so we found that with disability objects, it's getting them wrong at least a third of the time. And so that means we've got to put more data in, and we've got to make sure the rules are right around that data. And then the third principle is that we've got to innovate. And if we do that, I think we have the chance to really change what's possible in making this generation and chapter of AI sort of more accessible. I think accessible AI is responsible AI. I'm full of these catchy phrases. I'm just hoping someone writes them down. But I think it's really important to be principled, I think is the key thing here. And you gotta have people looking and thinking about this.
Thank you. Just for my friends at the back of the room, I want to make sure that we're thoughtful on time, so just keep me honest on that one.
Hit the stop clock.
Or adjust it, one of the two. There we go. When we think about diversity and inclusion from a product standpoint, if I just build off of what you're on, one of the things that we spend a fair bit of time with the engineers these days. And if you'd asked me as a chief diversity officer sitting in human resources that I would spend a ton of time with engineers, that's probably not what I would have thought 10 years ago. And yet it's where we spend a lot of time, to Jenny's point, really co-creating side by side with engineers to make sure that the tech and the code and the playbooks and some of the foundational infrastructures are really inclusive from the start, up to and including diverse data sets, which it turns out can also be pretty expensive. So the good news is that we're starting to share more of those across the industry so that we can start to benefit more from the inclusive data sets. Microsoft's been focused on diversity and inclusion for the better part of 40 years. We're going to be 50 in April, if we can believe that, as a company. And so, for me at this point, it's kind of fun and a really new challenge to be able to think about, diverse and inclusive AI and increasingly more tech, because we've learned a lot in the last 40 years, right? I think about the work that you and your team have done for so many years on accessibility and sharing that with the world, and the ways in which, we are very clear that in this era of AI, we actually want to try and close the gap. You and I were talking about at lunch how the internet had the opportunity to reduce the gap, and it in fact widened the gap. Anything that you would add to that?
Well, I'm feeling this burden of responsibility to make sure that this era, this chapter of AI is far more inclusive and accessible and doesn't widen the digital divide, the disability divide, the inclusive divides that exist out there, and those are very scientific. We know that the disability divide, the unemployment, underemployment rate for disabled people is twice that for disabled versus non. But I also think we have to be methodical with the data. So one of the fun things that we've been doing, fun and hard, is actually adding more data in that is inclusive. And so we started a coalition with 4 of our peers in tech industry, which by the way is pretty unheard of, is partnering like that. So working with Google, Amazon, Apple, and Meta to pull data from people with disabilities to help improve speech recognition. We do that with the University of Illinois, and that's been improving speech recognition. So it's understanding impacted voice better. It's so logical when you think about it. If you're going to make AI more inclusive, then you've got to put more data in that is from those people. And we're doing the same thing, actually. The brand new one is that we've just formed a partnership with a company called Be My Eyes. Anyone know Be My Eyes? Heard of it?
A couple of them.
Who's got a fruity phone? Apple
That's
phone?
an Apple phone.
You'll get up with me in a minute. It's an app. It's a free app. It's not Microsoft. It is for blind and low vision. You can all download it and all try it because actually its purpose is you can sign up as a sighted volunteer to help blind and low vision if they need assistance. It's a quick phone call. But they also have AI in there, and they have a lot of videos that they've gotten through that process. Microsoft is now in partnership with this company to pull those videos into our AI models, a lot of them. In fact, the first 6 million minutes transferred last week. And so think of this as videos taken by blind people of objects like guide dogs and canes and braille devices that AI will now understand. So I think you have to be methodical. You have to think through privacy. You have to think through a lot of the most important things of our time. But I think you've got to pull that data in.
Yeah, I reflect on even the work that we did with the engineering team in 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗃 and the way in which we gave people, the opportunity to reflect their own identity in their digital thumbprint or their digital identity, and that included helping people understand how to pronounce your name and having a little bit of a video to introduce yourself. But it also included pronouns, which it turned out were at the time the #1 wanted feature from customers. But we needed ephemeral experiences in the technology to be able to make sure that we were able to keep the trans and non-binary population safe in that process. And so in partnering with external experts and also our internal employees, it took us longer than we wanted it to. People gave us feedback that they felt like we were probably late to add that feature, and yet it was really important for us to be able to prioritize the safety of the end user and give the end user control over their identity from meeting to meeting, given how global 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗃 is and the fact that we want individuals at all times to be in control of their own safety equation. And so, it's those kinds of experiences where, the idea is sometimes a little bit farther away than the actual experience that we can create, and yet by partnering with subject matter experts and the engineering teams, we can get there from here. Jenny, one of the things that we have talked about is, if we reflect on, 150 years ago, electricity, was born, and it has taken that amount of time to get all over the world, and yet there are many countries, communities today that don't have electricity when others of us think of it as a mainstream benefit. When we think about not leaving people behind, particularly individuals of marginalized identities or geographies that haven't always been the first to have access, how do you think about making sure that we're balancing the potential of AI with the urgent need to include and uplift those who are most at risk of exclusion?
I think that's the responsibility component, isn't it? It's like you were just saying with the pronouns. I think we have to do it ethically and we have to do it right. So designing with people, I think, is incredibly important. I know the amount of time you spent with the community to get those features right. I do think that the most important thing we can do is make sure that as we build with, and we don't just think about this as the potential to exclude, it's also the potential to paradigm change. If you go back 150 years, one of the biggest inventions that we all, well, I don't use, but many use, was actually created around them, which was talking books. Who uses Audible or any of those? Well, they were first created as talking books for the blind. Again, we didn't want to leave blind people behind. Braille was just getting around. Louis Braille created that in Paris, but it was hard and expensive. So talking books started to get created so that folks with blind and low vision could enjoy. I think some of the same comparables are the same to today. We have the opportunity to paradigm change, really paradigm change, with some of the latest technology. And then we've also got a responsibility to make sure that we do this ethically in a principled way that methodically pulls in the right things. So what do I mean to that in pragmatics? There's another great app, actually, it's a Microsoft one called Seeing AI, which is the #1 app for the blind. And they have been around since 2017, so they've been using AI for some time. And it's simple things. You can use your camera on your phone to understand a barcode. Or if you're in a restaurant where the lights are dark, it will read the menu out for you. And it will say, hey, can you tell me the vegan options? It will just pull out those for you. Simple things. Well, they're now looking at, yeah, that's great to embed sort of baseline accessibility. How can this now take us further forward and paradigm change? They're adding audio descriptions on videos. So you can put your video in, and it will now describe what that video is doing. That's technology that is utterly paradigm changing. But I will tell you, behind the scenes, all of that has been created with the blind community. It's actually built by a blind developer, 𝗬𝗫𝗍𝗍𝗫𝗍, who is amazing. And the same is happening with actually Copilot. I think Copilot, 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗸𝗫𝗍𝗍𝗫𝗍, Copilot, the first community that got hold of it was actually our disability ERG to give feedback on what was working, what was great across the spectrum of disability. So I think we're learning a lot about how to do this and the innovations that can really help to burst forward. But I think if we think about technology, we can never forget probably the most important part, which is the people behind it and how we put that same onus there. So I have to pivot to you. Such a pivotal time when we really think about the connective tissue. If you think about those examples with accessibility and you pull it back to D&I, learning, skilling, leadership development, if we have the right people in the right places, we're seeing some of what can be created. But how do you see those two things really coming together? Not just accessibility, but broadly in D&I.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm thoughtful that as we were getting ready to have ChatGPT and then Copilot come on, you and your team were really hacking ableism before it even got launched. So it's a testimony to sort of the people, but also the leadership behind what it means to be inclusive of the disability community before the product even makes it to market, as opposed to launching it and then going like, hey, wait a second, can you help us now? So I just applaud you and the team so much for being on the forefront of the product. I know we have a lot more to do, but getting in on the foundational floor of the product, I thought was pretty amazing. You know, one of the things that we think through constantly as it relates to learning and skilling and then diversity and inclusion is the fact that in order to have an AI companion that we trust, presumably we have to believe that it knows a little bit about who we are and the perspectives that we have and the ways in which we want to use it. And so that requires not only empathy, but it requires a ton of cultural competence to be built into the tech. And so, you know, I think that there again, you see the business case for representation in the expertise of the engineering function with the representation of, you know, the planet that we're hoping to serve. You know, at Microsoft, 76% of employees who've joined in the last 5 years say that they joined Microsoft for Microsoft's culture. And our commitment to diversity and inclusion is a part of that because of the ways in which our products and the connections that we have to partners and customers are all threaded and embedded. You know, I think that one of the things that we're constantly challenging ourselves to think about is the half-life of skills today is a fraction of what it once was. And so how do we constantly create the conditions for people to upskill and reskill? You know, gone are the days where we're like, oh, I'm too busy, I would love to learn blah, or I'd love to get, you know, a skill, but, you know, I'm spending too many time in meetings. Those days are going to result in people being irrelevant and or uncompetitive for the job market. And so each one of us have got to find ways to build that time into our calendars to make sure that we're proactively investing in our skills. We have sessions, our employee resource groups actually get together now and build, you know, have skill building sessions together. And it's wild. They, you know, call a meeting and like 900 people show up. And that's a testimony to sort of the commitment, but also the understanding of how fast this space is moving and the fact that there is a ton of awareness, particularly for individuals of marginalized identities, that skilling and learning is going to continue to be the forefront of being able to remain competitive in the workplace. When we flip to sort of another angle of the people pillar that we're talking about, Jenny, you have often shared that the disability community, continues to remind the mainstream, sort of nothing about us without us, which is again that representation point. But how do you think about that when there isn't necessarily, engineers who have lived experience or disability themselves? How do you think about infusing the mindset or the habits of the disability community into the engineering product so that we get the opportunity to be more proactive?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point you were just making on skilling, which is that actually building inclusive products can be learned. You don't need to be disabled, which, by the way, you're all coming my way at some point. That's just stats. As we all get older, it's very much correlated to it. But you don't need to have a disability or lived experience to work on accessibility. It can be a learned discipline. And I think the same goes with inclusiveness as a whole. How can you be a better ally? How can you use that knowledge to make sure that no matter what you do, whether it's writing a document, making code, writing code, whatever it is you're building and creating, you pull that in with you. And I think it's putting some time aside to invest in those skills. So last week I had it is very nerve-wracking to do this. I had the task of sending an email to every Microsoft employee. I know you do it far more than I do, but so it's one of those emails that you've pored over for 52 years, and you sit there procrastinating before you hit send. Has anyone done that? Just me? Okay, thank you. So I did that last week, and it was to launch the newest version of the Microsoft Accessibility 101. This is a mandatory training that every Microsoft employee has to take. And I'm always nervous because who likes to push out a mail that says, welcome to your new mandatory training? It doesn't generally make you very popular. And so we try and keep it punchy. And we always link to the ERG, which I'm a very proud sponsor of, and my goodness, helped to create 18 years ago now. And here was the surprise. So far, 99% has been, we love this training. Why is that? I think it's short. It's creatively done by an incredible training leader on our team called 𝗬𝗓𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗬 the latest AI features, how you can use that and make it pragmatic into your environment, how you can use it to make sure that your next email, your next whatever is more inclusive and accessible. And it shows the potential of how you can change the world by investing in inclusive product making. People are ultimately in technology to make a difference. And so it pulls you back to the mission and why we do this. It's also quite short. By the way, folks, if you want to have a look at it or steal it and use it for your company, it's just aka.ms/accessibility101. It's one part of the skilling, but I think it's really important, as is attending sessions and training like this. I think that's also, really important, whether you're investing in this session or the Ability Summit or any of the other D&I material and inclusive product making that material exists out there. I think it's really important to invest.
Yeah, and I think that, one of the things that, I've learned since, I've been at Microsoft for 6.5 years, and that makes me relatively young, I think, compared to some. But the thing that I really appreciate about Microsoft is its willingness to share our best practices. We don't know it all, but we do share where we can in the event that people can use the best practices that we're investing in. I spend a lot of time with smaller organizations who don't necessarily have the resources or the opportunity to invest in the same way that Microsoft does. And so, it is one of the things that I really appreciate about Microsoft, and particularly on the accessibility front. It's been such a journey for so many years, and yet as Microsoft has really learned and grown and applied sort of its growth mindset to the evolution of the accessibility and the diversity and inclusion agenda, we just keep publishing what we're learning in the hopes that others
good and bad.
yeah, the good and the bad to learn with us. Which sort of brings us to partnerships. Many of you in this room are partners with us on so many things, and thank you for that. But Jenny, I'm wondering if you could speak to just sort of how your job has changed relative to partners in tech. You know, it is of course the case that as things get more complicated, you know, for sure we don't want to go alone in any of it, and so we've been able to connect and learn from so many of you and the companies that you're a part of. But how do you think about partnerships in the era of AI and sort of the opportunity for us to learn with others?
Yeah, I think partnerships are even more critical now as the pace and speed and velocity increases. I think it's being very thoughtful, strategic, and again, methodical with who you partner with and to what end. And so when I came into this role 8 years ago, we did have a whole series of partnerships really to help us to make sure that we were designing and building and including accessibility right, whether it was Windows or gaming. In fact, some of the partnerships with the veterans organizations, Warfighter Engaged, that was the core partnership that led us to create the adaptive controller, the Xbox adaptive controller, several years ago. So we've learned through these partnerships over time. Today, they are taking, I would say, a different shape. They're changing a little bit. And I'll mention two. I think one, has anyone heard of the RNIB, Royal National Institute of the Blind in the UK? We're partnering with them. They're leveraging and pulling in all of the AI toolkits to really help them to create more accessibility quicker and faster. And so we are seeing a lot of partners leaning on AI and leaning on us to work together to solve problems, which is ultimately what we want to do. So they need to produce Braille versions, high contrast, high density, high font size versions. And that's a very manual task, incredibly manual, quite labor intensive and expensive. And AI is speeding up that process. And we're hoping that that spreads across the blind community, again, closing the divide a little bit, little by little. The other I would say we're learning is with a lot of different companies and partners who are leaning on Copilot in particular for their neurodiverse employees. Who knows neurodiversity? Who's heard that term? Just give me a sense. Okay, quite a lot of you. For those new, it is a relatively new term, maybe 6, 7 years down the line. It's an umbrella term. Includes disabilities like autism, ADD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, all of them non-visible, non-apparent, and all of them quite hard and expensive to diagnose. And we're seeing a really big boom in the demographic of neurodiversity as people feel a lot more proud in their identity and ownership, but they're also finding really big benefit from Copilot, and it's so natural, it makes so much sense. And we're actually working with EY right now we're partnering with 16 different companies, a lot of them across the pond, to understand the impact of Copilot on their neurodiverse employees. And we'll be publishing more on that in 3 weeks. But I think it's a really fantastic partnership that's helping us to learn where AI is helping, where it's hindering, where we need to do more, and where we need to get this into people's hands, because it could potentially be, candidly, life-changing. And the difference between somebody feeling very productive in the workplace or not. So we're learning just how important AI is and where to focus our energy. So yes, it's pretty fascinating, but what about you? I know you have also partnered forever and more with different organizations globally across many, many different communities. How is that changing for you in this world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've often in the diversity and inclusion space used partners to be able to have conversation in community and by industry. I went to Grace Hopper when there were like 200 people, and now there's like 26,000 people, which might be dating myself, but it's or partnerships with 𝗦𝗲𝘀𝗀𝗶cie or SHIP or Tapia or Afrotech or, all of those public-private partnerships are incredibly important to allow us in the for-profit world to understand the kinds of conversations and topics and emerging needs of communities, but also the ways in which our technology and our workplaces need to evolve to continue to not only attract, but retain and grow incredible talent. And so nurturing those partnerships is important. We don't just write a check and wish them well. We spend so much time co-investing with these partnerships so that we have a longitudinal opportunity to co-create and learn and grow together, which I think benefits not only the organization, but of course benefits us as Microsoft. But then sort of back to the data conversation and the ways in which we need to be really thoughtful in the era of AI to build habits so that we don't look up and discover that because of speed or competition or any of those really important, pressing sort of commercial needs that we forget. And so we're partnering with, Black Tech Street in Tulsa. We're spending a ton of time on supplier diversity. I know that you and your team have been instrumental in helping not only the indigenous communities preserve language through our product, but also to be incorporated and included in our supplier landscape as well. Anything you want to add on that?
No, I mean, you bring up a big point, and I think that is really why we're here. We are here to make sure that we work in partnership to extend the benefits of technology across different communities. The indigenous one, I would say, and Vinny is sitting in the front, is leading this work for us, is doing incredible work to make sure that we're preserving language. And again, this is about 4,000 languages around the world that are at risk because of an aging indigenous population and these being passed down generation to generation through stories. And so how can AI really preserve that? For us, it's another really good example of why we need people who have diverse perspectives, who are great allies, who can work with us. This is led by an indigenous team at Microsoft, working with partnership in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, here and more, to make sure we do this right. We don't want those languages to be preserved wrong. And there's so much beauty and nuance to all of these different, it's just an incredible, I personally love this work.
Yeah, and not only to make sure that we're using the products with the people, with the partnerships, but then ultimately, from a Microsoft standpoint, going out and seeking out that talent to invite them into Microsoft and into the technology industry. So we have covered 3 of our 4 Ps, which means your questions are near. So please get warmed up for questions. But as we talk about perspectives, Jenny, I'd love for you to share a little bit about, how do we get the right amount of information and telemetry on what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong? How is it that we build listening systems? What best practices would you lift up in the spirit of getting perspectives from end users, from employees, and from customers?
Yeah, I would probably say there's been 2 big learnings for us. And again, we're coming up on our 50th year, which I'm feeling. I'm feeling, I'll be 50 next year, my goodness. So I feel like I'm aging with Microsoft. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. But what we have learned is that when we've gotten accessibility wrong, it's when we've thought about this as a nice to have or an optional thing. And we haven't managed it like a business. So the first is to make sure that these inclusive efforts we manage rigorously. I do measure everything. I am a full-on nerd. I love it. I bring on the scorecards, bring on the data, the reporting. I literally clicked send on it last night. Every quarter I send an email to the board and the leadership that says how we're doing on accessibility across 5,800 products, websites, tools, 330 buildings. It's really important. Are we perfect? No, but you have to measure it like a business. And the second is set up some systems for listening. That's our other biggest learning. When we've missed the plot in a product not being good is when we haven't been listening to our employees and customers. And so the biggest gift I have is I have a dad team. I don't have a mom team, but I have a dad team called the Disability Answer Desk. And they take about 12,000 calls a month from customers with disabilities. It's open to everyone. And our job is to just help people with technology. Most people come to disability during their working careers through accident and illness and are new to accessibility. So it's about how can we empower, but we also get a ton of feedback. And that feedback is gold. So I think measure and manage and listen, I think, are the two. How about you?
Yeah, I would say, from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, it's really important for us to be willing to listen to all of it, right? Internally, we have 220,000 people in 190 countries. You can imagine that comes with many perspectives of humanity that we need to accommodate at Microsoft to be able to create a thriving workplace where all employees can do their best work. But then also really listening hard to our partners, our customers, and how we can continue to learn from them and serve them so that as businesses we can continue to grow together. I do think that whether it's our employee resource groups or our employee communities, the good news is Microsoft employees aren't shy, so they will tell us whether we are doing things well or not. But we also have this beautiful transparency motion where we share our data. Whether it is good or whether it needs opportunity, we share it. And that's part of our accountability motion to recognize the fact that we know that we have a lot more to do, despite the fact that we've built systems and structures and methodologies that allow us to demonstrate progress as well. So we're going to jump to audience questions, but before, as we do that, I'm hoping that one of you will spontaneously decide that you have a question to ask, or folks online, if you have a question to ask. How do you think of, so much of these conversations around AI have us both feeling like things are happening faster than they've ever happened, and in many ways that's a welcome change, and in many ways that's a confronting change. How do you think about accelerating progress, and how do we ensure that we can do so inclusively?
Yeah, this is the 2 a.m. question when you're like, ding, are we on the right path or are we on the wrong path? I think speed and pace is very much top of mind. And I do think this is about how do we lean on every single bit of infrastructure that we have, and we lean in even harder. And so literally every day I'm poring over what's happening in disability answer desk. What is the feedback we're getting? Where are we with this product? Putting the right people, prioritizing very carefully. But I will say that if you're like new to accessibility and you don't have those, know that we didn't have these cogs and wheels in place 8 years ago either. So I'd say it's never too late to get involved either. Don't hesitate, get going, because whatever you're creating, whatever you're building, having that insight will make sure that it's going to be even better and could lead to innovation that could be leveraged centuries from now. So I would still put that urgency in the system, I think.
Yeah, and I would say from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, sitting in 2024, so many people, sort of like, ooh, that's such a friction-filled space, Lindsay-Rae. And I'm like, actually,
nope. Human.
It's a human space, and we have a mission that calls on us to empower every individual and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And so that's a constant business invitation every single day to make sure that not only we represent the planet that we're wanting to serve, but that we're listening really hard to how we build products and services that everyone on the planet will want to buy and spend time with and help us co-create and get better with. So I gave you lots of time. Who has a question? Any questions from online or in the room? Thank you so much. Okay, 2 seconds. We'll take this one here and then we'll take one in the room.
Okay, great. Just a quick one. I'm really interested in the adding the data to AI to reduce bias. I'm especially kind of interested more in kind of like the image generation, kind of like with Microsoft Create or something like that. Like, I don't know if it's with Microsoft Create, but if I put in like family, a lot of times it'll just be like Caucasian kind of based instead, and there's many different races of family. I'm just kind of more interested in that kind of aspect, the image side of how you're putting data into that, or plans to do that. Great, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and you can feel the fact that like sometimes the image creator will serve you up exactly what you're looking for, and sometimes it serves up nothing what you look for. I say, you know, inevitably we do these fun team exercises where you have to create an image of yourself, and the image comes back far skinnier than I am, and that makes it, you know, I like that, and yet it's not me. And so I think, you know, it's a constant place where we're going to have to continue to make sure that the data sets, to Jenny's point, the data sets are as robust as possible, and you have an AI experience that begins to know more about you as the end user, so that it can start to serve up, you know, data imagery that is in fact reflective of you. And so, you know, it will get better. I think, Jenny, you've got some examples from a disability standpoint.
And I will say it's improving week over week over week. I mean, the responsible AI principles include fairness, and it includes inclusiveness. And so that's a very pertinent example that I know the team's looking at, to infuse the right data and give the right data rules around it, so that it's pulling the right books off the shelf when it's getting queried. And so I think it's that beautiful combination, but again, principles and then the methodical work to make sure those right examples are being pulled out. But yes, it's a really good example. Yeah. Responsible AI.
Jenny, I've heard you speak before about accessibility first in things like software development. As a company that we always develop software, you know, in a competitive market, one of the things that oftentimes we lose out on price because we have competitors that are writing similar code without accessibility features built in, right? Doesn't hit the accessibility, mantra that you just mentioned.
Yep.
How are we doing in terms of working with partners, working and basically getting the message out to make people that have accessibility needs as first-party citizens in the world of making applications work for everyone?
Well, thank you for coming if you've heard me speak before. I appreciate you being a double timer. You know, I would say that it's so logical to build accessibly from the start. If you think about a building and you have to make a building accessible and it doesn't have a ramp, you can't just put a cardboard ramp in. It involves blueprints and architects, and it's exactly the same in the digital world. The amount of cost to make something accessible once it's live is up to 100% of the original build cost. So it's just logical to do that. I think where things are changing is that people are realizing that accessible features are also productivity features. Captioning isn't just about deaf people anymore. It's about all of us being more included in a meeting when the microphone quality can be a bit wonky. And so I think there is a changing ecosystem around accessibility being fundamentally mainstream features. In fact, speaking into your phone, whether it's to Copilot or to Siri, that's speech recognition. What was that designed for? People with mobility. And so, yes, I think it's evolving, but there's always more that we can do. And our job is to make it easier for partners to be accessible so that they don't have to incur any additional cost or burden that they have to pass on.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to draw it there. Jenny and I will be available afterwards for those of you who have follow-up questions, but I'm so honored to have shared the stage with you. We spend a lot of time together and in one another's circles, and it's rare that we're on the same stage. So what a treat to be able to spend this time with you and with all of you. We hope that you are equally fierce in your commitment to build diverse and inclusive products, teams, workplaces, and we're really grateful to partner with all of you and the companies that you work for. So have an amazing day and have a great Ignite.